The radar contact appeared at 3:47 hours, 37,000 feet above the Nevada desert, moving at Mach 1.2 in complete radio silence. NORAD's threat assessment computers screamed warnings across every screen in Cheyenne Mountain. Unknown aircraft. No transponder. No flight plan. Heading directly toward Nelly's Air Force Base with the stealth signature of something that shouldn't exist. Colonel Marcus Kellaway gripped his coffee mug as the Situation Room erupted in controlled chaos. How the hell did something get that close without us seeing it? His voice cut through the chatter of analysts scrambling at their workstations. The massive wall display showed a single amber blip, moving across the digital map like a ghost materializing from nowhere. "Sir, the contact just appeared," stammered Lieutenant Rodriguez, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "No prior radar signature, no heat bloom from takeoff. It's like it materialized in mid-flight." The implications hung heavy in the sterile air. No known aircraft could achieve that level of stealth penetration into American airspace. Not Chinese, not Russian, certainly not some rogue terrorist organization. This was technology beyond current capabilities, and it was heading straight for one of America's most classified installations. "Scramble the F-22s, Kellaway ordered, his jaw set like granite. "Full intercept protocol. I want identification on that aircraft in 10 minutes or we're looking at a potential code red scenario." "Sir," came the hesitant voice of Captain Williams from the communications station, "what if it's one of ours? Some black project we don't know about?" The question froze everyone momentarily. In the world of classified aviation, the left hand rarely knew what the right hand was doing. But 30 minutes of frantic cross-referencing with every government agency had yielded nothing. No test flights scheduled. No experimental aircraft unaccounted for. Just an impossible radar signature moving through restricted airspace like it owned the sky. 2 F-22 Raptors lifted off from Nelly's within 8 minutes, their Pratt & Whitney engines screaming defiance into the pre-dawn darkness. Major Dylan Krugger led the intercept, his wingman Captain Torres maintaining formation as they climbed toward the unknown contact. Both pilots were veterans, their hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline coursing through their veins. The mystery aircraft maintained course and speed, seemingly oblivious to the approaching interceptors. No evasive maneuvers, no acknowledgement of repeated radio calls, just steady, purposeful flight toward whatever destination lay in its classified navigation system. In the depths of Cheyenne Mountain, Kellaway watched the 3 blips converge on his screen, knowing that in minutes, American pilots might be forced to fire on an aircraft whose origins remained terrifyingly unknown. The coffee in his mug had long since grown cold, forgotten in the face of a mystery that threatened to rewrite everything they thought they knew about air superiority and national security. The unknown contact continued its relentless approach, carrying secrets that would soon explode across the military's understanding of what was possible in the dangerous skies above America. "Ghost Leader, this is Control," came the crackling voice through Major Krugger's headset as his F-22 cut through the thin air at 40,000 feet. "Target bearing 270, range 15 miles and closing. You are cleared to engage if hostile intent is confirmed." Krugger's grip tightened on his stick as he watched the radar display. The mysterious aircraft appeared as little more than a shimmer on his instruments, its stealth characteristics unlike anything in his 12 years of flying. "Control, Ghost Leader. Visual contact negative. Target is maintaining course toward restricted airspace." Behind him, the Raptor's sophisticated sensors painted a confusing picture. Heat signature minimal. Radar cross-section smaller than a sparrow. Yet something was definitely there, moving with the purposeful precision of military hardware. "Ghost 2, maintain high cover," Krugger ordered his wingman. Torres acknowledged with a crisp "Roger," his own F-22 climbing another 2,000 feet to provide overwatch. Both pilots had trained for this scenario countless times, but facing an unknown aircraft with capabilities that defied explanation sent ice through their veins. The desert below stretched endlessly, its rocky landscape painted silver by moonlight. Somewhere in that vastness, night shift workers at classified facilities went about their business, unaware that above them, American fighters were seconds away from potentially shooting down an aircraft of unknown origin and intent. Control, Ghost Leader, attempting visual identification. Krugger pushed his throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of the twin Pratt and Whitney engines. The F-22 responded instantly, accelerating toward the ghostly contact that seemed to dance just beyond the edge of perception. Then he saw it, a sleek silhouette against the star-filled sky, moving with an elegance that spoke of advanced aerodynamics and cutting-edge engineering. The aircraft's lines were unfamiliar, its configuration unlike any fighter, bomber, or reconnaissance platform in his extensive database of enemy aircraft. Control, I have visual on unknown aircraft. Configuration unrecognized. Appears to be single-seat fighter design, but... Krugger paused, studying the strange craft through his helmet-mounted display. Control, this isn't matching any known threat aircraft. Repeat, this is not a recognized enemy design. The mysterious pilot seemed aware of his presence now. The aircraft began a gentle turn, revealing more of its unusual profile. Krugger noted the graceful curves of its fuselage, the way its wings seemed to blend seamlessly into the body. This was technology that represented years, possibly decades of advanced development. Ghost Leader, you are authorized to close for positive identification. Use caution. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Krugger maneuvered his Raptor closer, his weapons systems armed but not locked. Standard intercept protocol called for visual confirmation before any hostile action. But as he drew within 1,000 yards of the unknown aircraft, something caught his attention. Something that would change everything about this encounter. The exhausts. They weren't glowing with the characteristic blue-white flame of afterburning jets. Instead, they showed the subtle, controlled burn of someone managing fuel consumption with practiced efficiency. Not the signature of an incoming attack, but of a pilot trying to conserve fuel on a long-range mission. Krugger keyed his radio with growing uncertainty. This was beginning to feel less like an intercept and more like a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit together. Ghost Leader to Control. Target aircraft is not exhibiting hostile flight characteristics. Fuel management suggests this may not be an attack profile. The words hung in the air as 3 aircraft continued their deadly dance high above the sleeping desert, each second bringing them closer to answers that would reshape military aviation forever. The mysterious aircraft began to waggle its wings in the universal aviation signal for "Follow me." Major Krugger felt his blood pressure spike as he processed this unexpected development. Enemy aircraft didn't typically make friendly gestures during intercepts, yet here was this unknown craft essentially asking him to escort it somewhere. Control, Ghost Leader. Target aircraft is signaling. Appears to be requesting escort guidance. Colonel Kellaway's voice crackled through the secure channel from Cheyenne Mountain. Ghost Leader, maintain intercept posture. Do not comply with any requests until we have positive identification on that aircraft and its pilot. But Krugger was already noticing more details that contradicted the hostile scenario they'd been preparing for. The mysterious aircraft's navigation lights were on, flashing in standard FAA pattern. Its altitude and heading remained steady, showing none of the erratic behavior typical of either panicked or aggressive pilots. Ghost 2 moved to port side. I'm taking starboard for visual inspection. Captain Torres acknowledged and smoothly positioned his F-22 on the opposite side of the unknown aircraft. Now they had it bracketed, able to observe from multiple angles as they maintained formation in the thin air 7 miles above Nevada. Through his advanced optics, Krugger could make out more details of the strange craft. Its cockpit was tinted, obscuring the pilot, but the overall design spoke of American manufacturing principles. The lines were too clean, too purposeful for foreign construction. This looked like something that had rolled out of Lockheed Martin or Boeing's Skunk Works, not a foreign military factory. Control, visual inspection suggests this may be a domestic black project. Aircraft configuration and manufacturing quality consistent with U.S. aerospace standards. The silence from control stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Kellaway's voice returned, tighter now with growing concern. Ghost Leader, we've contacted every program office. No domestic flights are scheduled or unaccounted for. Maintain intercept. The three aircraft continued flying in loose formation, the mysterious craft maintaining perfect position despite the obvious stress of being flanked by two of America's most advanced fighters. Whoever was piloting that aircraft knew their business, displaying the kind of precision and calm that spoke of extensive military training. Krugger found himself studying the wing design more carefully. The planform was revolutionary, with curves and angles that suggested someone had taken stealth technology several generations beyond current capabilities. The materials appeared to be some kind of advanced composite that absorbed radar waves like a sponge absorbs water. Ghost 2, you getting a good look at this thing? Affirmative, lead. This is definitely next-generation hardware. Question is whose generation? The unknown pilot seemed to sense their scrutiny. The aircraft began a slow, graceful barrel roll, showing off its control surfaces and general airworthiness. It was a display of confidence that spoke volumes about the pilot's skill and the aircraft's capabilities. But as the mysterious craft completed its roll, Krugger caught a glimpse of something that made his heart skip a beat. There, painted small and discreet on the fuselage just behind the cockpit, was a marking he almost missed. A small American flag, followed by what looked like designation numbers too small to read at this distance. Control, I think we may have an American aircraft up here. The implications of those words would soon cascade through the entire military command structure, triggering questions that reached the highest levels of classified aerospace programs. The mysterious aircraft suddenly broke radio silence, and the voice that came through the encrypted military frequency sent shockwaves through every pilot and controller monitoring the intercept. It was distinctly female, calm and professional, with the clipped precision that marked a veteran military aviator. Nelly's control, this is Phantom 77 requesting immediate clearance for emergency landing. Aircraft experiencing navigational system malfunction. Requesting vector to nearest suitable runway. Major Krugger nearly choked on his own surprise. Control, did you copy that transmission? The confusion was palpable in Colonel Kellaway's response from Cheyenne Mountain. Ghost Leader, we copied. Stand by while we verify authenticity of that call sign and pilot identification. But Krugger was already processing what he'd heard. The voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to flying high-performance military aircraft. More importantly, the call sign, Phantom 77, suggested this wasn't some rogue operation or foreign infiltration. This was military, American military, operating under protocols that obviously existed well above his clearance level. Phantom 77, this is Ghost Leader. State your intentions and pilot identification for verification. The response came immediately without hesitation. Ghost Leader, Phantom 77, Major Zara Akafer, service number. She rattled off a string of digits with military precision. Currently experiencing total navigation failure. Request immediate assistance returning to base. Krugger felt the puzzle pieces beginning to click into place. Major Akafer. The name was unfamiliar, but her radio discipline and flight characteristics screamed military pilot. Someone flying technology that was clearly American in origin, using proper call signs and emergency procedures. Control, I'm recommending we treat this as a legitimate American aircraft in distress. The pause from Cheyenne Mountain stretched uncomfortably long. Krugger could imagine the frantic cross-referencing happening in the depths of that facility as they tried to verify the existence of both the pilot and her aircraft program. Meanwhile, the mysterious Major Akafer continued flying her impossible aircraft with steady precision, maintaining formation with his F-22s as if she'd been doing it her entire career. The morning sun was beginning to paint the eastern horizon with pale light, and Krugger could see more details of her craft in the improving visibility. The aircraft was beautiful in the way that only cutting-edge military hardware could be. Every line served a purpose, every surface optimized for stealth and performance. This wasn't some experimental prototype cobbled together in a secret hangar. This was a fully operational combat aircraft representing technology years ahead of anything he'd ever seen. Phantom 77, what's your fuel state? Krugger asked, falling back on standard pilot-to-pilot communication. Ghost Leader, I've got about 20 minutes before I'm running on fumes. This nav failure has had me wandering around up here for the better part of 2 hours trying to find home. The exhaustion in her voice was real. So was the professional concern of a pilot running low on fuel with nowhere to land. Krugger made his decision, knowing it might end his career, but understanding that some things transcended military protocol. Control, Ghost Leader. I'm escorting Phantom 77 to Nelly's for emergency landing. Whatever program she's part of, she's American military and she needs help. The moment those words left his lips, Krugger knew he just committed himself to a course of action that would ripple through the highest levels of military command. Colonel Kellaway's voice crackled through the radio with barely controlled tension. Ghost Leader, negative on that escort. Maintain intercept posture until we can verify the authenticity of this aircraft and pilot. But Major Krugger was watching Phantom 77's flight characteristics with growing concern. The mysterious aircraft was beginning to show subtle signs of fuel starvation, minor corrections, slightly less crisp responses to control inputs. Major Akafer was running out of time, and military protocol was about to become secondary to basic human decency. Control, with respect, we have an American pilot in potential distress. I'm not going to watch someone crash because we can't verify paperwork. Through his canopy, Krugger could see Akafer's aircraft more clearly now in the growing dawn light. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, representing billions of dollars in research and development. But more importantly, it carried someone who spoke like an American military officer and flew like she'd been trained at the same schools that had produced him. Ghost Leader, Phantom 77, came Akafer's voice, calmer than anyone had a right to be with fuel running low. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I understand the position this puts you in. I've been where you are, wondering if you're doing the right thing when the rulebook doesn't cover the situation. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. This wasn't some foreign agent trying to infiltrate American airspace. This was a military pilot who understood the impossible positions that service members sometimes found themselves in, where doing the right thing and following orders might not be the same course of action. "Ma'am, what's your background?" Krugger asked, abandoning formal radio protocol for a moment of human connection. 12 years Air Force, Major. Started on F-16s, moved to F-22s, then got selected for some programs that don't officially exist. Been testing hardware that won't see operational deployment for another decade, assuming it ever gets that far. Krugger felt something click into place. The voice, the professionalism, the way she handled her aircraft. This was one of the elite test pilots, the ones who pushed experimental aircraft to their limits in programs so classified that their existence was known only to a handful of people in the Pentagon. Control, I'm getting credible pilot credentials from Phantom 77. Request permission to escort for emergency landing. The answer came not from Kellaway but from a different voice entirely, one that carried the unmistakable authority of flag rank. Ghost Leader, this is General Morrison. You are cleared to escort the aircraft to Nelly's. Full priority handling. Clear all other traffic from the pattern. Krugger felt relief wash over him as he realized someone with sufficient clearance had finally stepped in to cut through the bureaucratic confusion. Roger, General. Ghost Flight escorting Phantom 77 for emergency landing. As they began their descent toward Nelly's, Krugger found himself wondering what kind of programs existed in the black world that could produce aircraft like the one flying beside him. More importantly, he wondered about the woman piloting it, whose calm professionalism under pressure had just earned his deep respect. The sun was fully above the horizon now, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and red, as three aircraft descended toward answers that would change everything about military aviation's cutting edge. As they descended through 25,000 feet, Major Akafer's voice came through the radio with a hint of dry humor that spoke to years of military service. Ghost Leader, I should probably mention that this aircraft has some unique landing characteristics. You might want to give me some extra room on final approach. Krugger adjusted his formation slightly, creating more separation. How unique are we talking about, Phantom 77? Let's just say the approach speed is going to look a little unusual, and the ground roll might be shorter than you'd expect. The engineers got creative with some of the systems. Through his HUD display, Krugger could see Nelly's Air Force Base growing larger in the distance. The runway was being cleared, and he could make out the distinctive shapes of emergency vehicles positioning themselves along the taxiways. Whatever Major Akafer was flying, it was important enough to warrant a full emergency response. Phantom 77, you've got runway 21 left cleared for emergency landing. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Roger, Ghost Leader, and thanks for sticking your neck out up there. I know this whole situation probably isn't covered in any manual you've ever read. Krugger found himself smiling despite the tension. Ma'am, if we only did things that were in the manual, we'd never push any boundaries. Sometimes you've got to trust your gut about people. The mysterious aircraft began its approach with movements that were indeed unlike anything Krugger had ever witnessed. Akafer's descent rate was steeper than conventional aircraft could handle, yet she maintained perfect control throughout. The craft seemed to hang in the air at impossibly low speeds, defying everything he understood about aerodynamics. Ghost 2, you seeing this approach profile? Captain Tor's voice carried the same amazement Krugger was feeling. Affirmative, lead. That's not flying, that's practically floating. As Phantom 77 crossed the runway threshold, Krugger watched in fascination as the mysterious aircraft seemed to settle onto the concrete with barely a puff of tire smoke. The landing roll was indeed incredibly short, the craft coming to a stop in less than 1,000 feet. Nelly's tower, Phantom 77, is down safe. Thanks for the assistance, everyone. But even as Akafer's aircraft rolled toward the waiting ground crews, Krugger noticed something that sent a chill through him. Military police vehicles were racing toward the mysterious aircraft from multiple directions, their red and blue lights flashing urgently. Whatever program Major Akafer was part of, her unscheduled appearance had triggered security protocols that went far beyond normal procedures. Ghost Leader, proceed to normal landing. Debrief will be conducted in Building 401 immediately upon parking. Krugger acknowledged the order, but his attention remained focused on the strange aircraft now surrounded by security personnel. Through his canopy, he could see them maintaining a careful perimeter around the craft, their weapons ready but not aimed. This wasn't an arrest, it was protective security for something highly classified. As his own F-22 touched down on the parallel runway, Krugger realized he'd just been part of something that would be classified at levels he'd never see. But more than that, he'd helped a fellow pilot in distress, regardless of the bureaucratic complications that decision might create. The morning sun cast long shadows across Nelly's as 3 aircraft sat cooling on the ramp, each representing different aspects of American military aviation's cutting edge. Major Zara Akafer sat in her cockpit, hands steady on the controls as security personnel established their perimeter around her aircraft. Through her tinted visor, she watched the organized chaos of a classified aircraft recovery operation unfold. She'd been through this drill before, though never after an unscheduled emergency landing that had exposed her program to pilots without proper clearance. The ground crew chief approached her aircraft with the careful respect accorded to experimental hardware worth more than most people's annual salaries. His hand signals were precise, professional, guiding her through the shutdown procedures for an aircraft he'd probably never seen before but understood was far beyond his clearance level to discuss. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to remain in the aircraft until the proper personnel arrive," came the voice through her headset from the ground control frequency. Akafer acknowledged with a simple click of her transmit button. She understood the protocols, had helped write some of them. When black programs intersected with the regular military, everything became complicated. People asked questions that couldn't be answered, and those questions had to be contained before they spread through channels that might compromise operations spanning decades. She could see Major Krugger's F-22 parked on the parallel taxiway, the pilot probably wondering what he'd gotten himself involved in. Good man, she reflected. The kind of officer who put doing the right thing ahead of protecting his career. The Air Force needed more pilots like him, even if his decision to help her would probably result in uncomfortable conversations with people carrying security clearances he'd never seen. Her aircraft's engines wound down with the distinctive whistle of advanced turbofan technology, the sound echoing off the hangars surrounding the flight line. The morning air was already beginning to shimmer with heat rising from the concrete, promising another scorching Nevada day. But Akafer's mind was elsewhere, calculating the implications of her navigation system failure and the exposure it had created for her program. 3 black SUVs approached in formation, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sunlight. She recognized the vehicles and their significance. Program security was taking this seriously, which meant her little unscheduled flight had probably triggered alerts all the way to Pentagon level. The lead SUV stopped precisely 20 feet from her aircraft's nose, and she watched as familiar figures emerged. Colonel Sarah Hendricks, her program director, stepped out with the measured movements of someone whose military bearing had been refined through decades of handling classified operations. Behind her came Dr. James Peterson, the program's chief engineer, his civilian clothes marking him as one of the contractors who made the impossible possible. "Phantom 77, you're cleared to shut down and exit the aircraft," came Hendrick's voice through the ground frequency. "Follow standard post-flight security protocols." Akafer began her shutdown checklist, each switch and button movement practiced through hundreds of flights in aircraft that officially didn't exist. The heads-up display faded to black, the flight controls went neutral, and the various classified systems that made her aircraft possible powered down in sequence. As she prepared to open her canopy, she caught sight of Major Krugger walking across the tarmac toward Building 401, probably heading for a debrief that would be both extensive and unsatisfying. He'd done the right thing, but in the world of black programs, doing the right thing sometimes came with costs that weren't immediately apparent. She made a mental note to find a way to thank him properly, assuming the security protocols would allow any future contact between them. Colonel Hendricks approached the aircraft as Akafer's canopy opened with a soft hydraulic whine. The older woman's expression was carefully neutral, betraying nothing of the conversations that had undoubtedly been happening at the highest levels of military command, since Phantom 77 had first appeared on radar screens. "Major, I trust you had an interesting morning," Hendricks said with the dry understatement that marked career military officers dealing with situations that existed somewhere between routine and catastrophic. Akafer climbed down from her aircraft, her flight suit bearing no unit patches or identifying marks beyond her name tape and rank insignia. "Ma'am, navigation system went down about 2 hours into the flight. Spent most of the mission trying to find home base using dead reckoning and prayers. And ended up being intercepted by F-22s from Nelly's, thereby exposing classified aircraft and potentially classified personnel to individuals without proper clearance." Hendricks' tone remained matter-of-fact, but Akafer could hear the underlying concern. "Yes, ma'am. The alternative was attempting a dead-stick landing in the desert after running out of fuel. I made the tactical decision that program exposure was preferable to program loss." Dr. Peterson approached with a tablet computer, already running diagnostics on the aircraft systems through wireless telemetry. "Navigation failure appears to be a cascading software error in the inertial guidance system. We'll need to do a complete system review before the next test flight." Akafer nodded, then turned her attention back to Colonel Hendricks. "Ma'am, what's the situation with the intercepting pilots? Major Krugger made the call to escort me to safety when control was hesitating due to verification issues." Hendricks studied her for a moment, weighing how much to reveal about the conversations that had been happening while Akafer was airborne. "Major Krugger and Captain Torres are currently being debriefed by personnel with appropriate clearances. Their assistance will be noted in their records, though the specific details will remain classified." The implication was clear. The two F-22 pilots had stumbled into something far beyond their security clearance, and their careers would now be forever marked by their exposure to classified programs they could never discuss. "Will they face any negative consequences for helping me?" Akafer asked. "That remains to be determined by people well above my pay grade," Hendricks replied. "For now, let's focus on getting your aircraft secured and figuring out how to prevent future navigation failures that could expose the program." As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, Akafer found herself thinking about the two pilots who had risked their careers to help a fellow aviator in distress. In a world increasingly dominated by regulations and risk-averse decision-making, their willingness to do the right thing despite potential consequences represented the best traditions of military service. She resolved to find a way to ensure their careers didn't suffer for their principled actions, even if it meant calling in favors from contacts throughout the military establishment. The secure debrief facility in Building 401 had all the charm of a maximum security prison, with concrete walls, no windows, and furniture that looked like it had been designed by someone who viewed comfort as a security risk. Major Krugger sat across a metal table from two individuals whose business cards would have been more classified than most military operations. Agent Patricia Morales from the Defense Intelligence Agency wore a gray suit that managed to look both professional and intimidating simultaneously. Her questions had been precise, methodical, designed to extract every detail of the morning's intercept while revealing nothing about the larger picture she was investigating. Beside her sat Colonel David Chen from Air Force Special Programs, a man whose uniform bore no unit patches or identifying marks beyond basic rank insignia. His presence alone told Krugger that whatever he'd stumbled into involved programs operating at classification levels he'd never imagined existed. "Major Krugger, let's go through the visual identification sequence one more time," Agent Morales said, her pen poised over a legal pad filled with notes. "You said the aircraft exhibited manufacturing characteristics consistent with American aerospace standards. Can you be more specific?" Krugger leaned back in his uncomfortable chair, trying to organize his thoughts. The surface finish was too perfect for foreign manufacture, panel gaps were minimal, and the overall build quality looked like something from Lockheed's Skunk Works. The materials appeared to be advanced composites, but the application was beyond anything I've seen in operational aircraft. Colonel Chen made his own notes on a tablet computer that probably contained more processing power than most small cities. Did you observe any specific markings, serial numbers, or other identifying characteristics? There was a small American flag painted behind the cockpit, followed by what looked like designation numbers. Too small to read at intercept distance, but definitely there. The two interrogators exchanged glances that spoke volumes about information they possessed, but couldn't share. Krugger found himself wondering how many black programs existed parallel to the regular Air Force, operating aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what seemed aerodynamically possible. Major, your decision to escort the aircraft to Nelly's despite orders to maintain intercept posture represents a significant deviation from established protocol, Agent Morales observed. Can you explain your reasoning? Krugger had been expecting this question since the moment he'd keyed his radio to announce his intentions. Ma'am, I had a pilot claiming American military identification, flying aircraft consistent with American manufacture, exhibiting fuel starvation characteristics that suggested imminent emergency. The voice on the radio sounded like every military pilot I've ever worked with. At some point, you have to trust your judgment about people and situations, even when that judgment contradicts direct orders from superior officers. Especially then, ma'am. Orders are important, but they don't cover every possible scenario. When you're dealing with human lives and split-second decisions, sometimes you have to fall back on basic principles of military service and human decency. Colonel Chen looked up from his tablet. Major, how would you characterize Major Akafer's radio communications and flight characteristics during the intercept? Professional, competent, consistent with someone who'd been flying high-performance military aircraft for years. Her radio discipline was textbook, and she handled her aircraft like she'd been born in the cockpit. Whatever program she's part of, they recruited someone with serious aviation credentials. The interview continued for another hour, covering every aspect of the encounter from multiple angles. Krugger answered honestly, knowing that any attempt to shade the truth would be detected by people whose job involved separating fact from fiction in high-stakes situations. Finally, Agent Morales closed her notepad and exchanged a final glance with Colonel Chen. Major Krugger, everything discussed in this room today is classified at levels that could result in federal prosecution if disclosed. You are not to discuss any aspect of this morning's events with anyone lacking appropriate security clearances. Understood, ma'am. However, Colonel Chen added, your actions this morning have been noted by people who appreciate officers willing to make difficult decisions under pressure. That appreciation may manifest itself in ways that benefit your career, though the specific details will remain classified. As Krugger left the debrief facility, he wondered if he'd ever learn the full story behind the mysterious aircraft and its enigmatic pilot. More importantly, he wondered if Major Akafer had made it through her own interrogation without facing consequences for her navigation system failure and the exposure it had created. The Nevada sun was climbing toward its merciless noon peak as he walked across the base, carrying secrets he could never share, but somehow feeling like he'd been part of something important. Major Zara Akafer's debrief took place in a different building entirely, one that didn't officially exist on any Nelly's Air Force base maps. The facility was buried 3 levels underground, accessible only through security checkpoints that required biometric verification and clearances that most generals would never possess. Dr. Peterson had spent the first hour reviewing telemetry data from her aircraft, his engineer's mind dissecting the cascade of failures that had left her navigation system completely inoperative. The data painted a picture of software conflicts between newly installed upgrades and legacy systems, the kind of integration problem that plagued cutting-edge aircraft operating at the intersection of multiple technological breakthroughs. The good news is that it's entirely software-related, Peterson explained, manipulating holographic displays that showed the aircraft system architecture in 3 dimensions. The bad news is that this particular failure mode wasn't anticipated by our testing protocols. We're going to need a complete review of the integration procedures. Colonel Hendricks sat at the head of the conference table, her attention divided between Peterson's technical briefing and secure communications flowing through the tablet computer at her elbow. The morning's events had triggered review processes at levels of military command that rarely involved themselves in individual flight operations. "Doctor, how long before we can resume flight testing?" Hendricks asked. "At least 2 weeks for software patches and verification testing. Possibly longer if we discover other integration conflicts during the review process." Akafer listened to the technical discussion, while part of her mind remained focused on the larger implications of her emergency landing. Programs like theirs existed in carefully maintained isolation from regular military operations. Exposure to unauthorized personnel created ripple effects that could compromise years of development work and billions of dollars in investment. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Colonel Hendricks, "what's the status of the F-22 pilots who assisted me? They didn't ask to get involved in classified operations." Hendricks looked up from her tablet. "Major Krugger and Captain Torres are being handled appropriately. Their actions were noted and will be reflected in their service records, though obviously the specific details remain classified." "That's not what I'm asking, Colonel. Are they going to face negative consequences for helping me when the bureaucracy was stuck in analysis paralysis?" The question hung in the underground conference room like smoke from an electrical fire, carrying implications that went far beyond simple personnel management. Hendricks studied Akafer for a long moment, clearly weighing how much of the larger picture to reveal. "Zara, you've been in this business long enough to understand that when classified programs intersect with regular operations, everyone involved faces career implications. The goal is to manage those implications in ways that don't punish people for doing the right thing. But there will be implications. There are always implications. The question is whether they're positive or negative." Dr. Peterson cleared his throat, drawing attention back to his technical briefing. "If I may interrupt the personnel discussion, we need to address the aircraft recovery schedule. The longer Phantom 77 sits on the Nelly's ramp, the more questions it generates among personnel who lack appropriate clearances." Akafer understood the concern. Her aircraft represented technology that wouldn't be publicly acknowledged for decades, if ever. Every hour it remained visible to unauthorized personnel increased the risk of compromising operational security. "How are we handling the cover story?" she asked. Colonel Hendricks smiled grimly. "Officially, this morning's events involved the intercept of an experimental drone that experienced navigation failure. The drone has been recovered by appropriate authorities, and the incident is closed. Anyone asking questions beyond that official explanation will be referred to personnel who don't exist. And the F-22 pilots who know it wasn't a drone will be reminded of their security obligations and the career benefits of maintaining appropriate operational security." The euphemisms were necessary in facilities where conversations were recorded and reviewed by security personnel, whose job involved protecting secrets that could reshape military aviation. But Akafer understood the underlying message. Krugger and Torres would be taken care of, but their careers were now forever entangled with classified programs they could never discuss. As the technical briefing concluded, and personnel began filing out of the conference room, Akafer found herself thinking about the strange intersection of technology and human nature that had defined her morning. Advanced aircraft and sophisticated systems were meaningless without pilots willing to make difficult decisions under pressure, whether that meant pushing experimental hardware to its limits or risking careers to help fellow aviators in distress. She made a mental note to find ways to ensure that Major Krugger's willingness to do the right thing was appropriately rewarded, even if those rewards had to remain as classified as the aircraft that had brought them together. 3 weeks later, Major Dylan Krugger received orders.